Hey guys, welcome to the 28th episode of the Learning Podcast. And if you're unsure, it's a Singaporean podcast dedicated to learning something new from every single guest on this show. And today, I have a friend I met through LinkedIn. His name is Nicholas. Nicholas, thanks so much for taking the time to come to this very ulu part of Singapore.
Dude, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it is quite far away.
Yeah, it's quite far away, right? It's next to Changi Prison for those listeners out there. A little context of Nicholas, right? He's very passionate about mental health. He's currently a National Mental Health Ambassador at NCCS, the National Council of Social Service. He is a speaker about sustainable mental health practices in a modern environment. He's currently working at WeWork as a community lead. And most importantly, right? Nicholas himself is a podcast host. Yes. So I think it's very interesting to be able to have conversations, let's say, about the podcasting community in Singapore. Yeah. Things that I could learn from him as well, because I know the guests that he had on, right, like are really, really very big, right? So I'm just wondering, like, how do you really grow a podcast? Yeah. And what kind of small things can I do as a mini content creator to really improve on the way? Yeah. A couple of reasons why I think this conversation will be helpful. Podcasting is one of them. And I really do believe like everyone should have a mini podcast and not to over glamorize the production quality of it. Right now you see 3 camera angles, right? For listeners out there, I actually put 3 cameras out there to make it as professional as possible, but from a very selfish perspective, I would say that my goal at the end of the day is really just to have the confidence to have just my smartphone in front of me, speak content that is valuable enough to capture people's attention. And for the fact that I have to put editing all this together, right, it's because the content that's coming out from our mouths is probably not valuable enough in that sense. So I'm not sure.
You never know.
You never know. I mean, this is just a whole process of finding out. So sorry for the long rant. Nicholas, for those listeners that don't know who you are, could you give a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, but I think before we even get to that, I think maybe you're selling yourself too short, JJ. I mean, it's like one of those things where, sometimes, when you're passionate and you really enjoy doing something, it does seem like there's a lot of work going into it. You put 3 cameras here. It does seem like overkill. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you're enjoying yourself, who really cares?
Yeah, I like it. Honestly, I like editing it. Then yes. When I re-look at those clips, right, then you see those moments where it's so quite funny, right? Yeah. I'm really glad I captured it digitally and through in a more professional setting.
Yeah.
For yourself, how do you got started in this whole journey of, let's start podcasting? Yeah. How do you even start?
So one of the things that really got me into podcasting was just that video seemed like a lot of work for me. And I think after my whole recovering from my mental health issue with clinical depression and stuff like that, I felt some drive to pay it forward, because there were so many people who helped me along the way to recover. And so I thought to myself, okay, it's very hard to pay back people who are who don't really need your help in some way or another. Yeah. So I was like, okay, so I can't really help them. Okay, is there something I can do to, pay it forward? So I thought, okay, let me go on a little bit of a speaking tour. Let me contribute as an ambassador and so. And I can tell you how that came about as well, because it was very accidental. These are things that are not planned, or at least I didn't plan it. But sometimes, things come your way and, it's worth exploring. But eventually I landed up in podcasting because that was just the easiest thing to do. And I wanted to move away from mental health issues per se, very directly related to mental health, but focus on the things that, affect us in some small way, whether it's in work or in life, that can accumulate to something bigger. And so my very cliche to say mission, and I feel like I shouldn't, but my mission in some way is just to help people just navigate the small things that, if you don't solve, it kind of lingers and it becomes worse. So that was how I got into podcasting.
I mean, for context, listeners out there, right? Nicholas here has a podcast. His podcast is called Echo Academy.
That's right. Echo with a K.
Yeah, sorry. Echo. So EKHO Academy. I've checked out his website. It's very nicely done. There's the guests on his shows, right? Strikes to me because it resonates with me because it's very, how to say, he has conversations with people who in technical sense, made it, like agile sprints, current CEOs and their processes. And it's like what you said, not directly addressing the issue of mental health. But could I just go to that for a short while, right? Yeah. Let's say for a time in NCCS, how do you even how do you even be a speaker about mental health at NCSS?
So that was pretty accidental, and I guess it was quite lucky because I had a friend. She was the PR agency representing NCSS, and at that time, when they wanted to get ambassadors to speak about their mental health issues, it's one of those like taboo, stigma related topics that people, while they want to talk about it, they're not so sure whether they want to be in the public eye. So I think that it was hard for them to get the right people, or at least they didn't know where to search for them. And so my friend who was working in the PR agency, she reached out to me because she knew my story because we went to the same university together. I'm not mentioning her name because I don't know if she wants to be.
It's okay.
Yeah. So, but
Jane.
Yeah. So when she reached out to me, she said, "Would you be interested?" And I thought, okay, I'll just go for the meeting. And I wasn't sure if I really wanted to be in the public eye. Yeah, it's one thing to talk to a room full of 20, 50, maximum 100 people. But it's another thing for the whole of Singapore to know that you suffer from clinical depression and you had all these stories, because you don't know how people formulate their thoughts in their mind. So at that time, I thought, I'll just go for the interview. Let's see what that goes. But I mean, the PR agency really sold me on it, and I was like, oh yeah, I should do my job and make sure that the story of mental health and getting help when you need it, I should be the solution, because I really benefited from it. So I was like, okay, I felt compelled, and that was how I became an NCSS ambassador. So it was very accidental, but I think I'm very lucky to have been given that opportunity. And
as an ambassador, right, what kind of activities are you involved in with NCSS, and what do you enjoy from that?
Yeah. To be honest, not too much. Maybe the first year was a bit intense because a lot of engagements. It all surrounded that the main video that came out, and I can show it to you later as well. So basically, is to showcase the stigma around mental health, and so there was a social experiment video that came out, and this social experiment video was really around this entire topic called Beyond the Label, trying to make sure that people with mental health are seen for people beyond the label that they have, whether it's someone who suffered from clinical depression or they're bipolar, etc., etc. So my commitment was for that video, to do that social experiment video, and I did a few radio interviews. I went on Channel News Asia, which was really I was
quite a lot, man.
I was really nervous. I think that was the first time. Usually when I speak in public, I'm not so nervous. I think I'm okay because I don't really care too much about the consequence. But I think when it's Channel News Asia, you feel like you need to elevate your game. You feel like they just they expect a certain level.
Can you paint us a picture? Like, you're going into the studio. What kind of setup was it? Was it more like an interview? Did they hand you the questions first? Like, paint us a picture of it.
Yeah, so they did give me a rough idea of the questions that were going to be asked. I didn't do it alone. I think the head of IMH, Institute of Mental Health, was also with me. But at the same time, I made sure I wore a jacket, because when I'm nervous, I shiver. Oh. So plus the cold, I think I would
double combination, right? Me too.
Yeah, so I was like, no, I have to wear a jacket, just to hide that.
Is this clip available?
It is. I think if you search hard enough, you'll find it.
I'll link it up. I'll link it below this podcast.
Yeah. And I'll send you the recording that my family recorded on the team.
Okay,
the very old school way.
Yeah.
But I remember the first question they asked, and immediately I stumbled on my words. But then after that, when you gain momentum, you get confident, and then things became easy. But at the start, I was like, wow.
Yeah, quite scary, right?
This is too much for me. Yeah, so that was that experience, but it was wonderful. It was true. I really appreciate organizations like NCSS, which is the National Council for Social Services, by the way, in case if you don't know. I really appreciate that them, the Institute of Mental Health, and all these people, because you don't see the work that they do, and they put in so much effort. And yeah, I mean, every once in a while we get a great PR campaign like the Beyond the Label that just, got so much media attention, and, the media dollars outweighed the amount spent. So, there's some KPI there, but, the behind the scenes and the work they do, I really didn't know. And then when I saw it in action, I was like, wow, because it's easy for someone like me who has experienced mental health issues to want to help someone because I know what it's like. But when someone doesn't know and still has enough empathy to help, that's a different game, that shows you how much love and compassion they have in their heart. And I really give my hats off to them.
How do you, let's say, make people more empathetic towards all this kind of, you would say, not so, to be honest, this kind of work is really not sexy, but it's really, in general, I feel, even as like just a normal Singaporean, I feel like it's underappreciated, right? What kind of, as a speaker, or like in this space of raising awareness about mental health, right? What kind of things have you involved yourself with, or how do you really create greater empathy and awareness for such an issue that's mostly taboo?
Yeah, empathy is hard, JJ. Like, it's one of those things where like it has to grow on you. It's not something like you can like cultivate immediately. So one of the things that me as a person, whenever I try to appreciate or empathize with someone I cannot relate to, the first thing I would do is just ask myself, if this has happened to me, how would I want someone to treat me? And then I just go from there, like there's no science behind it, or maybe there is, I don't know.
I think this is a very simple way. It's a very simple way of putting yourself in other shoes.
Yeah, and I realized there are some things, in all honesty, that I still cannot empathize with, right? There will always be things, that we, even when we see someone suffering, because there are certain ways that we see the world, it's very hard to empathize with someone. And so I think we should also be forgiving to ourselves during that period when we cannot empathize and we cannot appreciate, because our circumstances hasn't allowed us that experience yet to be able to relate to that person.
Don't hate yourself for not being able to empathize.
Yeah.
But at the same time, still live with it and accept it.
Yeah, I mean, I think because empathy is being thrown around a lot now, you must empathize and stuff like that. Fair enough, it's true. But if you don't, that's okay too. That doesn't mean you're not able to help. Sometimes being able to help and being able to empathize are two different things, and you can separate it if you can't empathize. I would say the first thing you should always do is just remove judgment from if you really have the intention to help, just remove judgment, because if not, it just makes helping much harder, because you're like, I don't really like how he's behaving to this, Yeah.
What's one thing you find difficult to empathize with?
I think I have many, but
honestly, it's a tough one. I also ask myself.
I have many, but now that you ask me, suddenly I'm struggling to think of it. But maybe if I remember, I will bring it up again. But we can move on.
Oh, sure. I know this is honestly quite.
It requires thinking. But trust me, I'm not perfect. I have a lot of things I don't empathize with.
We are not perfect.
Yeah.
Moving on, right? Let's say on your podcasting journey, right? Because you want to be able to share, not in a very direct way. I'm actually curious to know why not in a direct way compared to a direct meaning in the sense whereby you don't want your podcast just to talk about mental health directly.
Yeah.
Why so? Why not directly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, at first it was direct. The year before this iteration of the podcast, the Echo Academy podcast began, I actually focused on topics that were specifically mental health related and specific to my particular experience. But I think one of the things that happened is that every time I bring that up, it brings up all the past memories that were either painful or negative. And at some point I thought, okay, do I really want to help people that much that I want to bring up my own pain and suffering? And I thought to myself, nah, it's not that worth it.
You have to be selfish in that sense.
Yeah. So I thought to myself, you know what? No, it's not that worth it. To put it bluntly, I don't care about others that much that I'm willing to sacrifice my own mental health again, because it took me 12 years to overcome it. So I'm not going to put myself down that road again. Yeah. But I thought, okay, but at the same time, there must be something I can do, and so I thought, okay, what about the things that I can do to help people think about the prevention aspect, the things that accumulate, that if we don't take care, it accumulates to a point where we just lose it. We just burn out, we break out, and we just for lack of a better word, we just, lose ourselves. So I thought, okay, what are the things can we do, and how can I make it into a more niche category? And so I thought, okay, what about our career? Because that's something I haven't explored as well, and it would be just as interesting for me. So it's like, kill two birds, something that's interesting for me that I can continue to learn, but something that helps others as well to go through the things that, might cause them a little bit of distress and how they can overcome it. Yeah.
Do you have any, let's say, doubts before we started this podcast, and maybe there's someone on the other side listening that is the next podcast, king or queen, right?
Yeah.
What were the doubts did you have, if any, and how do you work around them to doing what you're doing right now? Because it's really quite impressive. You have a lot of episodes, right, with very big guests on as well.
Yeah.
How do you handle that kind of thought process before really starting on it?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I've come to accept about myself, and this has nothing to do with the podcast, but just life in general, is that doubt, fear, and all these little negative feelings, if you want to call it negative, they happen a lot to me. I'm always anxious.
They happen to everyone.
Yeah, and we can never truly measure it, but when we feel it, it's intense, right? And I thought to myself, okay, well, how can I continue doing it with that anxiety, with that fear, with that with that uncertainty? And so I thought to myself, okay, so when I start the podcast, what are the questions that I'm dying to know? And so regardless of my inability to be a good interviewer, which I don't even think I am, to be honest.
I'm definitely not. Yeah, all in the process.
Yeah, we're all amateurs.
Yeah. We're really just figuring this out.
Yeah, we're figuring this out. And so I think for me, the most important hurdle to overcome was to really make sure that the topics of all the podcasts were interesting enough for me that even when I'm a bad interviewer, my excitement about the topic will help me ask the right questions. And so because of that, the conversation, or at least I hope it was, flowing in a good way. And, I mean, not to blow my own horn, but I'm naturally a good listener when I'm interested in the topic. So that also made it a lot easier, because I just let the speaker speak and
follow up accordingly.
Yeah, follow up accordingly. So I think, I don't know, I think the fear and the uncertainty and the anxiety of meeting people who are bigger than you is always there, and maybe some of them even notice it, but I'm like, it's okay, you have some knowledge I want to know. I'll make it as quick so that I don't waste your time, and hopefully we both get something out of it, Just and I hope that my genuine interest in that person allows them to forgive my lack of experience as an interviewer.
I like it. It's very nicely put. Nicely put. Okay, so 101 for podcasting.
Yep.
How should people start? What are the first few things that he or she has to get in order before you even start a podcast? I feel this is very meta.
Yeah, it is. But I tell you, everyone has a different way of approaching this question.
Okay, but for you, how did you get started? The first steps.
Okay, so the podcast was something that I knew that I wanted to do for a long time, or at least for as long as podcast was relevant to the people, for the way people consume content, as long as they wanted to consume audioly, or is that even a word? But for as long as they want to consume audio content, I'll produce audio content. So I think the key for me was to really write down 100 topics that I can talk about, so that the podcast will at least run for 100 episodes. because then it's a worthy milestone. So even if it fails after that, it's like, all right, well, I got 100 episodes, so it's not that bad. So I thought to myself, okay, so this is how I'm going to start. I'm going to write down a list of 100 episodes. And that's exactly what I did. And then from there, at this point, it's equipment all.
Can I just backtrack, topics, right? So what, leadership, what kind of topics was part of this 100 list? So
for me, it was things that the topics are on issues that might be small to someone in someone's career, but might eventually affect them in a very bad way that might affect the trajectory of their career. So i.e. they might burn out, they might react in a negative way, etc. So simple thing could be like how to handle a toxic colleague, or another way is like how to continue your job search when you're like 6 months into unemployment. All these things that you don't think about until it happens to you, and then when that happens, you're like super anxious. Like you're as an individual, you become a bit more short-tempered. Maybe you become a bit more introverted. So all these things that are small when it doesn't happen to you, but accumulate the moment it becomes a big issue. So these type of topics.
So these topics are framed in questions?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's very interesting. I should do it. I definitely should do it. I like this.
Yeah, I mean, because to be fair, you never know what sort of thing your guest can share with you. So always go in with an open mind, but always go with a main question you want to ask.
Okay. Yeah. I need to learn from this.
Yeah. And you should, because you must understand that the person you're interviewing, if he or she is an expert in that particular topic, you have to milk it, man.
Yeah, because you really have to milk it.
You want to learn as much from them as possible.
In this limited time duration.
Exactly. And it's a privilege because they gave you this time, So like when they give you this time, man, you better make sure it's worth their while. Ask them. Make sure their brain is dry after that, because you ask them a question that not only do they like to share, but they have enough knowledge to share that you're out of time by the end of it.
And it's definitely knowledge that would be helpful for someone on the other end.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, other podcasting, after you got the topics down, what's next? Technicalities in terms of, do you have to be sensible microphone, where do you start off with?
Yeah. So one more thing I want to add before we talk about the setup and stuff like that, because for me, I always think the setup is a bit secondary, because you want to think about the longevity of your podcast, because setup, you can always build up to it.
Yes.
The second thing is, whenever now that I had the 100 topics that I had, I tapped my network to find out who was closest to that particular topic, who was in some way a subject matter expert, and then I reached out to them. The first 10 is the easiest because they are your friends, right? And even if they are in high places, if they are your friends, it's very easy. They're like, sure, Nick, yeah, what's up? When do you want to do it? But then, and I'll give this is something that I really want to share with you. Because it's a real podcast goal. After these 10 people have done the podcast with you, send them that Excel sheet of 100 questions and ask them, do you know anyone who will be able to answer these questions, and can you introduce me to them?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. And so after your first 10 or 20, it becomes a lot easier, because everyone knows someone who wants to share, and everyone knows someone who has something valuable to share. And so from then on, it becomes easier. And then the hardest part is for you to follow up, to make sure that
they get back to you.
You make sure your time matches with their schedule. Yeah. So
can I just sidetrack? Right? Is that how you got? Right now I'm working in VaynerMedia, so my current boss is Avery.
Yes.
Is that how you reached Avery? Avery is currently the head of APAC for VaynerMedia as well. Okay,
so Avery, I reached out directly because it was a very particular issue that I wanted to talk to her about.
What question was this?
So the main topic was really how to open a company in Singapore.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and for me that was really important to talk about, because I actually knew someone who was a Singaporean, and he was tasked to open up
company.
the Singapore branch of a global company. And the stresses and stuff that he went through was just like, within 1 year, right, I saw him without hair. I was like, what's going on here?
Oh no!
I was like, oh, okay, this is something that, okay, people like us, maybe we won't experience, or maybe not at any time soon. But, people do experience it. And I thought, okay, why not? Avery is just fresh from this experience. What can she share with us that I think may be helpful to
I'm so
others?
looking forward to hear this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, and Avery was like really, she gave like sharp answers that were like specific to the point.
Of all the podcast guests you've had, right, can you share just the top few? I know it's bad to just name, but what are the top few guests that you have had so far that you have learned a lot from and you think is the most meaningful to share? It's like sharing a podcast in a podcast.
In a podcast.
I like that. Podcast session. Yeah, but what are those big? For myself, I've listened to a few from Les. I don't know what's her full name. Les.
Lisa.
Lisa.
Yes,
I've listened to that as well. So I thought it was very interesting, like how
Yeah.
he shared her story of being from bankruptcy to all the way what she's doing right now. I think it's very inspiring as well.
Yeah, Lisa is a wonderful guest, and I mean, I think she would be really valuable to your audience as well if you can get her, and also happy to introduce her. All of it, because of the nature of all the topics, all of them were really valuable to me. But I'll tell you one that really hit home, because for me, I've really started to be more health conscious, because I'm physically active, blah blah blah, but I've never really I never really cared about my health that much.
Me too.
and I don't know what it is. It's just so hard. And to be honest, right, like I love McDonald's and Coke, so like it's like the worst thing to your body.
You are not alone.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's like super comfort food, right?
Yeah.
JJ? Like it's like one of those things where you just have it. So the episode 2, which was with Alexander Mians, and he talked about how to eliminate burnout and fatigue. And for me, the simple things that he was talking about, maybe they are not revelations. Maybe these are things most of us already know, but we never thought to do it. But because I was in a place where I was ready to accept that information, that particular episode was life-changing for me. And I'll give you some examples of it. Since secondary school, or since primary school, when you wake up in the morning, I don't know, I was never hungry, so I never ate breakfast. So it's been something that I've been doing for like more than 20 years, right?
Okay.
So, but Alex in his podcast was saying like, when you wake up, don't play games with your body. Your body needs, that inflow of, nutrients or supplements, or however he put it, you can listen.
So basically eat breakfast.
Eat breakfast, essentially.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, and he said, step number 1, eat breakfast. Step number 2, when you are able to do that, try to get it as healthy as possible. And so in my decision for 2019 to be a bit more, healthier in general, I decided that I wasn't going to change too many things. I was just going to start with breakfast. So now I always, I bought myself a little blender, and I make sure I have a cup of juice, mixed juice, and oats, instant oats, and just as a form of discipline, have it every day. So I don't have to think about what to eat for breakfast, just a very standard way to eat. And just so that I can program myself to at least know that I'm making some sort of change, and then now that this habit, is ingrained. It's only been a few months, but now that it's ingrained in me, I'm focusing more on the physical health part, which is like exercising and stuff like that. So that episode really, it hit home for me because I was willing to accept that information. And for me, I think that's the beauty of content nowadays. Most of the content now, JJ, I feel like it's like quite obvious, right? Like
What do you mean obvious?
Like in the sense that you kind of already know.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's no content out there that's truly original.
True.
You know, if I'm being blunt, even mine,
Even mine.
yeah, even my podcast, like
Yeah.
you can find this kind of information.
But I think
anywhere.
it's just the way that we communicate in specific languages, in body languages, the specific sentence, the genders that we are. Let's say the way I say it will not resonate with a female lady, like wise. So is that how? That's why I think it's meaningful, in a sense, to have this kind of different conversations.
It's so true, and I think when you have an audience, everyone listens to it, but not everyone's ready to receive the information. So most of them are passive. But like me, even though I'm the host of this podcast, that particular one got me thinking so much, because I was like, I really should start thinking about my health and stuff. So so that for me, that hit home. But I want to, if I were to encourage, your audience to listen to a particular episode, I would encourage you guys to listen to the podcast with Alexandra Young. She was a former Olympic mountain biker for Team Hong Kong.
Wow.
And her story for me is really amazing, because it shows two things: the story of athletes transitioning to regular work, which in and of itself is not easy, but a story of a woman who's transitioning when you have a family, you have kids, and then also to break into technology, to start from the bottom and work your way up after you've got
had
some
high moments.
Especially when you have some status, right? Shit, I went to the Olympics, man.
Yeah.
Now I have to bloody do some
corporate job, right?
Yeah, so that episode, Alexandra Young, great episode. How to transition to an entirely new career.
I know this is not like a big justification of the episode, but what is that one lesson that you got from that? If you were to overly simplify and summarize it from this, it sounds like there's a lot. I'll be definitely to listen. Link it up in the video description. But what is this summary that you got from her?
Yeah. Well, by the way, this feels like I'm plugging my podcast.
No. I think it's not. People should, because I do check out other podcasters as well. The kind of content. I think yours is quite nice. It's a very informal, very chill vibes ish. I like that.
So one thing I really learned from Alexandra as a person as well is that the power of persistence is really the only thing that separates us from our successes. She was a weekend warrior mountain biker. The fact that she made it to the Olympics,
that's crazy.
It's crazy, Crazy. And this was, and the most important thing of all of that, right, is something that I'm not even sure if she was aware that she said it, but it really stuck with me. She said, like, when she first started to compete professionally, like, she was at 20% of where other people wanted to be. 20% or somewhere in the low percentages.
Very far away from the actual standard.
And then once you hit 90, right, you're with the pack. But then what separates you from the pack to the podium finish is that 1% change that you do. And so for me, everyone says these things, but when athletes say it, it hits a note, because like athletes really know, like, already when you give 100%, right, it's still not enough, because that 1% will make you a world champion type of situation. So when Alexandra told me that, I was like, or at least mentioned it in the podcast, I was like, that's why we always talk about how so many people give up too soon. And chances are they've already hit that 90%, but from 90 to 91 is so hard, because you have to differentiate from the crowd that you're just not willing to do it. And I was like, okay, persistence, that's so true.
The big lesson.
Yeah.
Going back to podcasting, right?
Sure.
What are the next steps after finding this topic, after finding potential guests, right? How do you move on from there?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Tim Ferriss.
Me too.
Top guy. I really love him. So Tim Ferriss, he gave a list of questions, but one of the questions he said, like, when you're going through something difficult, is to ask yourself, what if it were easy? And so for me, that was such an important thing to ask when I thought, okay, how am I going to do this podcast that it was easy? Because I have a day job, like this, while this is my passion project, I don't want it to take up so much of my time that not only do I have a day job, I have a night job. Then I'm like, well, when do I have time to have a break? So I thought, okay, what's the easiest way to do this? And so I thought, okay, let audio aside, let's just get a simple mic setup, which I can share with you,
Equipment list down in the description.
Yeah. Well, everything also down in the description. It'll be longer than a podcast. So I got a simple setup, similar to yours in that there's the audio box, but it's a handheld mic. And people used to say, you should get a stand, make it easy for your guests. I'm like, listen, man, I don't know if this is going to last 10 episodes. Let's just, wait a while.
Yeah. Before we invest in more equipment.
Exactly.
Yes,
I just got that and I was like, let's just get it rolling, start interviewing guests where when it's easy for them, they can come to my place of work and we can record it there. When it's difficult, I can go to them. We'll just find a time. And now with the COVID situation, we just do it on Zoom. So I try not to think about, oh no, is this going to affect audio quality and all. Even though I really prefer the audio to be good, I realized that I need to always ask myself, what if it was easy? And
okay, so I really need to take this.
Hey, you're a Tim Ferriss fan. You should know this, man.
Okay, honestly, I'm not like a super. I only listen. Honestly, I only listen to his podcast when they are really the guests that I want to hear opinions from.
Yeah.
Like recent, I listened to his podcast with Ray Dalio, the one with the New Year's resolution. Like his interest in the psychedelics and all this kind of stuff. It's quite interesting, I must say. And
the psychedelics episode was good, eh?
Yeah. What are the biggest mistakes that, let's say, you have made as a podcaster?
Small things. Okay, if you want to be a podcaster, one of the small things you have to remember is when the other person is talking, don't even breathe into the mic. Yeah, you know what I mean? Because the thing is, when you're editing it after, if that person for some reason speaks softly and just so happens that moment you exhale, you can't edit that part to make it louder, because when you make it louder, your exhale becomes louder and in the end you still can't hear the person. So all these small things, like when the person talks, just put my mic away and listen, are the things that I had to learn on the fly. Just so that, to make sure that the editing becomes a lot easier for me. The second thing, which I think is the thing I learned very late, I think only like now, is because I'm so nervous I will waste their time, that the setup is so quick. Like I always never check the audio. So sometimes it's too loud, sometimes it's too soft, and you're like, but because they are already there, you're like, oh, what? Okay, whatever. You just start. Yeah, I'll figure it out later.
I empathize so much.
Yeah. So I think all those things over time, you will find your own way to get it right. And when you're just starting your podcast, it's okay. Let those few episodes where you're gonna screw up be screwed up, because that's the best way to learn. And if you're really worried, just get guests who are your friends who will be more forgiving when your quality isn't that good at the start.
For context out there, right, I must make a confession, right? It took me about 22 episodes to realize that there's a front and back of this microphone.
Because you're using a condenser, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't realize. Some episodes the quality was like so bad, then some of it was okay. So it took me 30 episodes to find out. So I really empathize. How do you market your podcast?
Not very well, for starters.
But your website is very how do you market?
Well, my website is clean because I'm also a web developer, so I know how to design websites.
Oh, I see.
So and on the side, I'm also learning how to build an app. So these are things that are of interest to me. So it's no problem. I can do it. But that doesn't mean my marketing is really good. But what I will say is for me, it's not so important to hit the mass audience really quickly, and I don't want to spend my time thinking about stuff like that. At least not when when this is not my full-time job. Because for me it's like a waste of brain space, because it causes anxiety, makes you stress. It's like, how come not so many listeners? So I think for me the most important thing is get to my 100 episodes. And once I have 100 episodes, right, I'll have so much content to repurpose that when I start sharing and maybe putting some ad dollars behind it, right, I'll have enough ammo to reach the mass audience. So for me right now, it's really not a worry. For me, it's just making sure that the people who listen to it will be like, wow, okay, this is what I can do. I'm really stressed out at work, because I have a toxic employee or a toxic colleague at work. This is how I should approach it. Okay, let me execute. So it's just making sure that the content is so valuable that people's mental health and mental well-being will be strengthened by the end of it. Because I know by the end of 100 episodes, I plan to continue, but after 100 episodes, boom, that's when the marketing begins.
Okay, so you're waiting for the 100 mark to really go full fire.
In some ways, it's not a set goal or anything, but I think once I reach 100 episodes, I would have mastered enough of my craft to know that whenever someone listens to it, they'll be like, this is a great podcast, But now when I'm still figuring it out, just enjoy the process lah, Just enjoy when it's shit, enjoy when you fiddle with the audio.
Yeah, the microphone and everything.
Yeah, no rush, because it's not like this is my livelihood. This is my passion. I'm very keen on helping people improve their mental health, but it doesn't have to be so. Yeah.
Okay, moving on, right? Last, I would say, anything else do you think that would be worth telling a person who is just starting on this podcast journey before, let's say, you move on to the next topic? Let's say, I'm interested to find out about your thoughts on, let's say, the content that you absorb as yourself as a content creator. But last things that you'll tell a person who is thinking of starting a podcast.
Sure. If you're going into a podcast, whenever you think about whatever topic or whatever the podcast is going to be about, if you can see yourself going beyond 10 episodes, then it's worth considering. If you can see yourself going beyond 50 episodes, then it's worth doing. I wouldn't recommend it otherwise, because when you're doing it on your own, it's not like you can outsource it to people. Or maybe you can, you have some disposable income, why not? You can just get someone else to edit it and stuff like that. But you should always ask yourself, does your passion outweigh the effort required? And if it doesn't, then just don't do it, because it's like, why do anything half?
That's interesting. Moving on, right? What are the kind of content you absorb? Let's say you would say influencers that you follow, books that you have read that has greatly shaped into how, in general, it has made you a better person.
People. It's interesting because the people you admire change over time. For me, at least.
Yes, different phases of your life where different people appeal to you in a sense.
Yeah.
Or different content appeal to you.
When it comes to creators, I kind of bucket people. There are a few creators that I really admire. One of it I already mentioned, which is Tim Ferriss, right? He's someone I admire and someone that I just look to for like examples of advice. Is because as a creator, he's always willing to experiment and see like what is a good way to bring across a message or a content or a type of content, etc. But on top of that, like he's also quite smart in the sense that he's figuring out how to monetize. And that's something I also want to do, in the sense that, at some point it'll be nice to have this Echo Academy thing be able to at least sustain itself, where I don't have to be the one, putting money into it. So for me, that's a great example to follow. In terms of another creator, and he's an author, Neil Gaiman. Do you know? He's a great writer, just a great writer, and he's someone that I really like because he also does his own audiobooks. So he could just YouTube this guy. This guy's voice is nice, like velvet chocolate. This guy, like,
really?
You know what I'm saying? Like,
soft,
it's just low, deep.
Nice to hear.
Yeah, very nice to hear. But one thing I really like is, even though I read his books, I value his interviews more, because it's really a look into the mind of a creative and how he approaches things. And one of the hardest forms of art is writing, especially if you're writing novels. And so for me, like, these are the guys that I look to for advice, because how do you do the hardest things that very hard to see results, at least at the start? How do you continue doing it? And for him, it's like, just write, like, his answers are just like, what I do is I wake up and I just write, like, just something so simple. It just hits you, because, like, for me at least, I understand that for him, the process for him is the art. and he really enjoys that. And every time it's a reminder for me that if I'm not enjoying it, when it's the hardest, then maybe I need to rethink about, whether it's worth pursuing, because then I have a job for that, right? You know what I mean? So these two are someone that no matter what phase I'm in, at least for the past however many years, 10 years if you will, have been pretty constant.
What books, what kind of books does he write? Is it more of like a non-fiction kind? Fiction novel? Oh, fiction.
Fiction. Because there is one non-fiction book he wrote. Apparently it's really good, but I haven't read it. I think it's American Gods or something. Yes, Neil Gaiman. So, and this is one of the reasons why I really like Neil Gaiman, because he's known as a fiction writer, but at the same time, like, there are some non-fiction titles that he wrote, mainly just to pursue another aspect of it, because he's always trying to perfect his craft and exploring every genre within his form of art, And so for me, like, it's all these small things that really inspire me. So that's an example of why I tell you I like his interviews more than his books, lah. His books are nice.
But his interviews are mainly about his like process of writing. Is it like more of like just like all those kind of motivational, inspirational business advice, that kind of content, or is it more just his general thought process on sharing his thoughts on how he comes up with all these novels? Just a process.
Yes.
Is it?
So there's I can't remember his writing partner, but there's this one series of books, or one book in particular where he co-authored with someone, and he shared his journey. I'll try and find that YouTube video for you.
Linked in the video.
Yeah, linked in the video, the Wikipedia. What was really interesting about that process was it kind of helped me understand two things. Number one was that he's trying to improve his craft, and like he's trying to explore writing with someone else. Usually you think of writing as a very solo project, right? But number two is just learning how you work with others to create something that's very creative and subjective. You know how hard that is when what's in your mind and what's in the other person's mind is not always the same. But then at the end of the day, you come up with writing a book that you wrote together.
The egos come into play. I'm a better writer than you. I need this line to be in a book.
Exactly.
How does he navigate that?
I can't remember offhand, but in the interview itself, there was all these small things, nuggets of how he did it, and how patient he was about the process. I don't know whether in reality he was that patient, but how he just accepted certain things just to make sure the process of the book came about was just it really was very inspiring, and also it really helped that he has a really nice voice. That guy's voice is very soothing.
Okay, moving on to more or less the ending of the podcast, right? Just some very, very general questions, right? Yeah. What are the few biggest lessons that you have learned in the past 12 months?
About anything in general? About podcasting?
Anything. And why it meant so much to you for these lessons learned?
So right now I'm in the process of writing a book, just almost as a way of, it's like a form of catharsis for me, just to end my mental health experience and just to let it go.
Is it more of like a personal, like, biography style that documented what you went through and sharing that process with others?
But in a way, but also specific things that I think is general enough for people to use as a way to think about how to solve their own problems, but using my experience as an example of that. So as I'm writing the book, there are certain things that I think are really universal, but certain things that I feel more in touch with now, because of what I went through and how I view life now. I don't know whether it's the Chinese phrase or one of the dialects of Chinese. The phrase is called Wu Wei.
Gosh, I don't even know. My Chinese is not good. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. What does it mean?
So basically, it's just, almost like letting it flow. It's almost like you're not supposed to force it. Just let it happen. So, and that for me is a great philosophy. based on my memory of how I approach my mental health, my battle with clinical depression, because I was always very impatient. I always thought the world was going on without me and I was being left behind because I took time off from school, and when I was working, I didn't concentrate on my career because I was trying to recover from mental health issues. And so I always thought like I was losing out in the world, everyone was just passing me by. But then this concept of Wu Wei really helped me understand that, there's really a lot of patience involved, in the sense that every time, because I thought people were like getting ahead in life, I would try and rush my recovery. And every time I rushed my recovery, I would relapse. Because, and a good analogy of this was, let's say you're in an exam hall and you're given 2 hours to finish a maths paper, but you finish within a half an hour. What are the chances you made a lot of mistakes? It's quite high, right?
Highly likely.
Yeah, so compared to if you did it in 2 hours. So it's the same mentality that I had to bring to my mental health recovery, to be patient, even if the world passed me by, even though that's not entirely true. I had to be patient and just let it be. This is my life. This is my process. Let whatever that comes to me, and let me learn my best way to overcome it and become stronger from that. And so that's a philosophy that sticks with me, and something that I firmly believe people should be. They should just be more patient with the process, because it's so difficult to know what is best for you. And when you don't know what's best for you, you start to look at all the other people who are successful in how you want to see yourself as a success. And when you follow them blindly, that blind ambition will result in something, in a place where where you realize you don't want to be. So I think that's something that I hope people at least think about.
Wow, that's deep, man. That's really deep. Like I realize a lot of what you're saying talks about the process of enjoying the podcasting, the process of going through the motion, and all this accumulates to this biggest lesson you have learned is essentially being super patient and letting it flow accordingly. Yeah,
because honestly, I don't know if life will take me to a point where, like, I'm famous like your boss Gary V or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so and that's okay for me. For me, it's just like, how can I make my time valuable? How can I bring my best self to work? How can I make sure that I'm repaying all the help I got to become better, so that someone else doesn't have to suffer as hard as I did?
In terms of this phrase, let it go, right? Where was the source of this from?
The phrase Wu Wei? The phrase Wu Wei was something I first heard from Alan Watts, which is a philosopher who kind of dabbled in all the religions just to get the best of all of it and kind of...
That's quite cool.
Philosophize it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy listening to him, not because I genuinely am into this philosophy or anything like that, but just to appreciate other people's way of thinking. But when he first talked about Wu Wei, I thought to myself, like, I think this is something that's so relevant for me, or maybe it's relevant for us in a Singaporean culture, right? Because it's because by definition, meritocracy makes it a very dog-eat-dog world where you're trying to get to the top. And oftentimes you forget that in that process, how much of life are you letting slip by because you're not really focused on the doing. You're focused more on the wanting. And every time you want and you forget about the do, you realize how much of time you're wasted. And so you don't want to look, at least I didn't want to look back when I'm 80, 90, 100 years old thinking, wow, I spent so much time wanting, and how much did I really do? And so for me, that was really important.
Enough wanting, just do it.
Yeah.
For Alan Watts, right, is there any other kind of content that you absorb from him, like books that you have read, like any notable other lessons from him?
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of useful, like interesting content from him. I'll definitely check his content out.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy. I mean, a bit too hippie for me.
Hippie.
I don't know whether he's hippie, but he's the type of person, right, where to really master the things that he talks about, right, you really have to live in a different kind of world that the real world presents us. You know what I
Are you
mean?
talking about like drugs or like
No,
psychedelics?
no, nothing of that sort. But it's more like, it's very hard to practice what he preaches in a modern world.
Do you have an
fully.
example?
Okay, it's very difficult. Maybe even the process of Wu Wei, right? Letting it be. How many people would agree with that realistically? Yeah, I mean, it sounds really nice, right? But can you imagine like someone in your job, for example, who is worse than you,
Cussing at you, swearing at you in the exact moment.
Exactly.
You're asking me to just let it flow.
Yeah, just be all right. Or even worse, if that guy in the end gets promoted over you, even though you deserve it more. And most people will be like, no, I need to speak with HR. I need to figure this out, try and solve this, right? Whereas what he's trying to say is like, you can do that, but even if nothing comes of it, that is the process. There's really no right or wrong. You know what I mean? In this world, in that sense.
I think it's always an ideal that you strive towards. You don't expect it to like be extreme at it, be an extremist at it. But I think in the pursuit of going for these ideals, I think that is all that matters.
100%. I mean, I think you said it better than me. I just went a long way around. You just came up with a few words.
In terms of the best advice you have ever received, what is it?
So I spent some time in Ecuador while I was on semester abroad.
Wow, that's a very like exotic. Not many.
Oh, it's a beautiful place.
Oh,
I would recommend it.
Okay.
And I met a really like influential person, and I mean, I wrote a book about it as well.
You wrote a book about it?
Yeah, I wrote a book about it.
Link in the
No, I mean, I'm really not like promoting this book, but it's just for me to really show that I was really inspired by this person. And this person, basically, he had two philosophies that to this day, like I really kind of ingrained it in who I am as a person. So it's almost my identity now. So these two things are, there's no right or wrong, only the consequences of your actions. And for me, that's always held true, because no matter what I do, I shouldn't think of it as, is this right or wrong? It's more like, regardless of if it's right or wrong, am I able to bear the consequences of whatever happens, both good or bad? And for me, that's a really good way of living life, because sometimes the illogical or irrational part of you will take over, and you will think about doing things that may not actually be in your best of interest, but you will try and rationalize it in a way that it is right. So for me, when I try and make decisions, I always think, okay, what's the good outcome and what's the bad outcome of this, and can I handle either of it? And I was like, this guy, he really has it. he really gave me such a useful thing. And the second one, which is a Quechuan phrase, which is the indigenous people of Ecuador, or at least that area, the Andean mountains, those people. But it's a common phrase in those parts. It's called La Chuya Vida, which is live life on your own terms. And for me, and that was the title of the book as well, because for me that was really something that he felt truly, or he felt really one with that phrase. And I start to feel that way too, just to live life on your own terms, because at the end of the day, you just have to be comfortable with the person you are.
Accept who you are.
Exactly.
Who you are.
Yeah,
I mean, even myself, sometimes I really find myself, like recently I met some of my friends, right? Like they are, right, by like success measures, really doing a lot more better than me. They have their own business. They are so much better. But honestly, it's really something I'm struggling to deal with. But let's say just accepting who you are. I think that's it's like what you say is, are you ready to accept and practice this information by yourself? And it's an ideal that I'm always striving to towards. What is the worst advice have you ever received?
If I can just maybe rephrase the question a little, to what's the worst type of advice? I would say the worst type of advice people give now are that of like those gurus you see on social media now. for me, those guys, they speak their experience as truth. And because we can resonate with it, we also believe it to be true. And we use it as a mental shortcut. And we're like, oh, if this guy says it and he's a big timer, it must weigh
you rationalize to yourself that
exactly. And for me, I feel the social media gurus are doing a disservice to people, because all those people who follow you blindly they've now decided that they're not gonna think for themselves. I mean, not all of them, of course, but there'll be a certain chunk of people who are not going to think for themselves. They'll just be like, this guy, whatever he says, I'm gonna do it. Where I feel like what's more important is for us, and this is something that maybe our education system also didn't do so well, is to teach us how to learn. Because it's easy to learn something, but it's hard to learn how to learn.
Wow, it's meta. I get it.
So I don't know, I really have a bit of a pet peeve with all these gurus who just say this is the way, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. I'm like, how do you know?
Yeah.
You only know your life.
I mean, it's a different context to who's listening. Sometimes, let's say, if you are abroad, let's say this is I would say most American, most of these gurus we would say is from the Western world.
Yeah.
And I would say, let's say, because we understand English and perhaps their content resonates with us, right? Then we absorb their advice. But the thing is, the context in the world that they live in is so much different from the context of what Singapore really is.
Exactly.
So it might be really, really different.
Yeah. And of course, this is not to say that they don't give great advice. They definitely do. But I think they owe it to their audience to also tell them to learn how to discern what I'm saying.
Think for yourself. Yeah. And don't just blindly listen to what I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. 1 year from now, right? What are the things that will need to happen that will make it the best year in your life in general?
Well, right now, I have a long distance marriage with my wife. So my wife is currently in the US.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, there are a lot of things that I want in my life. But I think for me, the most important thing is really just for us to finally be in the same place. Yeah, because
she's working there right now.
She's working there right now, and I mean, it's a dream job. So I would never be like, come back here. Yeah. But it's like working towards being in the same place. I think 1 year from now, I want it to be
in a central location, somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere together. As long as we're together. I mean, even if it's I
feel like this podcast could go on. Could you give any general tips towards long distance relationships, being in a marriage that is so physically apart? If there's a few golden wisdom of nuggets that you can drop.
It's not golden wisdoms, but I'll tell you something, because we had a fight about this. I mean, some time back, of course, because the most important lesson is whatever you are going through in a long distance relationship, your partner is also going through the same thing. And so I remember there was one time I was super upset. I was like, man, we're not together, and every time I just have to miss you and stuff, and I was thinking, and from a very selfish point of view, it's I'm feeling this way. But then my wife Julia at that time, I mean, she's currently my wife also, but at that time she said to me, you forget, I'm feeling the exact same way now, so why are you taking it out on me?
That's interesting.
And I was like,
the mind was blown, right?
Yeah, I was like, it's so true, it's so natural to be selfish, right? And so I was like, and ever since then, I start with her in mind, which at first I wasn't. And I think that leads to tip number 2, try to be more unconditional with your love, which is super hard to do. It's very easy to say, really. But you're always thinking of yourself.
Yes.
At least I am,
It is always, like I say, always an ideal to strive towards.
Yes. Yeah.
Man, Nicholas, thanks so much for joining this podcast. I think it has been really interesting to find out by your perspective of the kind of content that you absorb and the kind of principles that you live by. I think I feel so pumped and motivated, Good, in terms of how people could follow up. Could you perhaps are you most active on LinkedIn, Instagram? Where can people reach out to you if they're interested?
Yeah, sure. I mean, always happy to connect with people. They can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn Nicholas Patrick. That's my full name. I guess you can put the in the
link in the description.
Everything
Yeah, I always like to say that.
Everything is in the
I always like to say that.
If they want to check out the podcast when I'm not the one speaking too much, the other people are. It's Echo Academy, you know, branding. Yeah,
Yes,
link in the description. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have, I'm like super interesting on Instagram or LinkedIn. But if you want to chat, I'm always down for that.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. Thanks so much for joining in this podcast. I have a question for you. How do you end off your podcast? I have no idea how to end off my podcast.
If you listen to all the endings, it's just very awkward. I'll be like, I would say, there's always, the last question will always be like some sort of parting wisdom that I would want.
Yeah.
And then I would just try to end it off naturally by saying things like, words to live by. That's something I'm going to remember. Thanks so much, JJ, for your time. And hopefully you'll come back to the podcast soon.
Okay. So Nicholas, thanks so much for joining on this podcast. And I hope to see you in the next episode very soon.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.